You won't believe what happened when fake HOA police came to arrest me, but I'm the real sheriff. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when I first heard the knock at my door, though something about it didn't feel quite right. The sound wasn't typical. It had a forceful urgency to it, almost like it was more than just a neighbor asking to borrow something. I opened the door, and to my surprise, two individuals in what appeared to be official uniforms stood before me. They introduced themselves as members of the Homeowners Association Police, a title I'd never heard of before, but their badges seemed to indicate they were serious. They were tall, wearing dark sunglasses, and had a no-nonsense attitude. At first, I thought it was a joke, a prank of some sort. I mean, how could an HOA have its own police force? I had lived in the neighborhood for years, and nothing about the community rules had ever mentioned such a thing. As they started explaining, it became clear that they weren't here to joke around. They informed me that I was in violation of several community rules, and their tone made it obvious they weren't going to take no for an answer. I stared at them, my mind racing with confusion and disbelief. I had always been a responsible homeowner, taking care of my property and respecting the community's regulations. They listed off a series of supposed infractions: an unsightly lawn, a mailbox that was slightly tilted, and even the audacity of having my garbage cans out too early. But none of it made sense. The lawn had been freshly mowed just the day before, the mailbox had always been in the same spot, and the garbage cans, well, I had simply forgotten to bring them in the night before. It wasn't the end of the world, and it certainly didn't warrant this kind of confrontation. My first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss them, but the seriousness in their voices made it difficult. One of them held up a piece of paper that resembled an official citation, though something about the form seemed off. It didn't look like anything I had seen from a legitimate HOA communication before. They said I would need to appear before their HOA court or face hefty fines, but that wasn't the worst part. They claimed I would be arrested if I failed to comply immediately, and that they were there to take me into custody. That's when the absurdity hit me like a ton of bricks. HOA police? Arrest me? The idea felt so far-fetched that I almost couldn't take it seriously, but the way they spoke and carried themselves made it hard to dismiss entirely. They were standing on my porch, insisting that I comply with their order. It felt like the world had gone mad. I glanced at the neighborhood around me, and everything seemed calm. There was no chaos, no riot, no reason for such a strange confrontation. This was a quiet suburban area, not the setting for some bizarre government crackdown. Yet here I was face to face with two individuals who claimed they had the authority to arrest me over what amounted to a handful of minor infractions. I wasn't about to let some unproven officers walk me out of my own house. I stood my ground, challenging their claims and demanding proof of their legitimacy. They tried to reassure me, saying that the HOA had the authority to act in this manner and that they were simply doing their jobs. But everything about the situation seemed wrong. The more I questioned them, the more their answers became evasive, their voices growing more authoritative, as if trying to intimidate me into submission. But I wasn't intimidated. I'd spent years as a sheriff in this town, and I knew how to spot a fraud when I saw one. It wasn't until the taller one started becoming more aggressive that I started to question who these people really were. The guy was pushing his authority too hard, too fast, and the more I observed, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. I noticed that neither of them was wearing a name tag, which was odd for anyone claiming to be a law enforcement officer. My suspicion grew when I noticed they were both wearing the same brand of shoes, and they weren't the type of shoes I would expect an official officer to wear. They looked like something out of a low-budget movie, far from the professional footwear you would find on a genuine officer. The realization hit me that they were imposters, not actual law enforcement, and definitely not HOA police. I began to think quickly, running through the possibilities in my mind. Could they have been hired by someone in the neighborhood to harass me? Or is there something more sinister going on? My gut told me that this wasn't just about some garbage cans being out too early or a slight tilt in my mailbox. These imposters had something else in mind, something far more dangerous. Everything about them screamed fake, and I decided to take action. The situation had escalated into a real threat, and if I didn't act soon, it could turn into something worse. My heart began to race as I realized that they were standing on my porch, and they could easily make good on their threat to arrest me. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I knew I had to be careful. If I made a mistake, I could escalate the situation even further. So, I stayed calm and collected, focusing on the situation at hand. As I was about to close the door in their faces, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection on my window. My sheriff's badge. It had been years since I had worn it, but it was still there in the drawer where I kept it, a symbol of my authority in this town. And then it clicked. I wasn't just some random homeowner. I was the sheriff of this town, and I had the power to deal with this situation. The thought filled me with a sense of calm confidence. The imposters had no idea who they were messing with. Suddenly, the whole situation felt like a game I could win. They had underestimated me. I wasn't about to let a couple of fake officers get the best of me. I had dealt with dangerous criminals before, and this was nothing more than a petty scam. It was time to turn the tables. But how would I do that? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to catch them in the act, expose their lies, and show them that they were messing with the wrong person. I wasn't going to let them walk away with any power over me. As I opened the door again, I was prepared for what came next. It was time to take control. The moment I opened the door, I could feel the air shift. The imposters had underestimated me, and now it was time to show them who they were really dealing with. But before I could say anything, the taller one pushed forward, raising a hand as if to stop me from speaking. "You need to comply now," he said, his voice gruff and full of authority, though it lacked the weight of a real law enforcement officer. His companion, the shorter one, stood back, crossing his arms, clearly trying to look intimidating, but all I could think was how poorly they were pulling off this act. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that they were trying to play me for a fool, and that was something I couldn't let slide. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. There was no time to panic. I had been trained for situations like this. With my background as sheriff, I knew how to stay calm under pressure, and this wasn't the first time I'd dealt with shady characters trying to make a quick buck off someone's ignorance. These two had just chosen the wrong person. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, giving them a calm but firm look. "I'm not going anywhere until you prove who you are," I said. The taller one's expression faltered for just a second, a brief moment of uncertainty that confirmed my suspicions. He quickly masked it, though, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't need to worry about who we are," the shorter one chimed in, his voice condescending. "You need to worry about the rules you've broken. We're not here to debate. We're here to enforce the law." His words hung in the air, but the problem was there was no law. Nothing in the HOA's rules said anything about sending police to make arrests over garden decorations or garbage cans. This wasn't a crime. It was petty enforcement of arbitrary standards designed to make residents feel like they were constantly under surveillance. And now, these guys were trying to intimidate me into submission. I let out a small, almost sarcastic laugh. "The law? You're telling me that my mailbox being a little crooked is breaking the law? Do you even hear yourselves?" They didn't respond right away, which only made me more certain that they didn't have any real authority. The more I looked at them, the more their act crumbled. They were just playing a role, and it was becoming painfully obvious that they weren't prepared for someone who knew how to spot a fake from a mile away. I glanced toward my driveway and saw my neighbor, Mrs. Miller, walking her dog down the street. She glanced at us briefly, then quickly looked away, clearly not wanting to get involved. Still, the presence of someone else in the vicinity made me more confident. If things were about to get out of hand, I wasn't alone. But I knew I needed to act quickly before these two clowns decided to escalate the situation further. "I'll tell you what," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "I'll let you get in your little arrest if you can show me a single piece of legitimate paperwork that backs up your authority. Until then, I suggest you get off my property before I call the real police." The taller one's face flushed with anger, and for a moment, I thought he might do something rash. He clenched his fists, but his partner quickly stepped in, shaking his head as if signaling for him to calm down. They exchanged a look, one that seemed to say, "This is getting out of hand," but neither of them made a move to leave. Instead, the taller one, now visibly irritated, took a step closer to me, his finger pointed accusingly at my chest. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "We've been authorized by the Homeowners Association to handle these matters, and you will comply. If you don't, you'll regret it." I stood my ground, my eyes narrowing as I assessed the situation. If they were truly HOA agents, why hadn't they been able to produce a single shred of paperwork or evidence of their authority? They were just bullies, and I was tired of playing their game. I'd seen my fair share of intimidation tactics in my years as sheriff, and it was clear that they were hoping to scare me into submission. But they had chosen the wrong target. "You want to threaten me?" I asked, my voice growing more confident. "Go ahead. But I'll tell you right now, I'm not the kind of person who gets intimidated by cheap tricks. You want to arrest me? Go ahead and try." My words stung, and the taller one recoiled slightly, taken aback by my boldness. He looked to his partner for guidance, but his partner, who had been quieter up until that point, remained silent, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. The tension between us was palpable. It felt like something was about to snap, but I refused to back down. I knew that once I showed weakness, they would press harder. They were testing me, seeing if I would give in to their demands. I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice becoming more assertive. "And unless you can show me proof that you have the authority to be here, I'm going to call the sheriff's office, and I'll have you both escorted off my property." There was a brief silence as the two of them processed what I had just said. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They hadn't expected me to fight back this hard, and it was starting to rattle them. The taller one, his jaw clenched, took a step back, his earlier bravado faltering. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "We'll be back." With that, the two of them turned on their heels and walked off my porch, retreating to the sidewalk, but not without throwing one last threatening glance over their shoulders. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. The adrenaline had begun to wear off, and I realized just how close I had come to letting these imposters walk all over me. But I had held my ground, and that made all the difference. As they disappeared down the street, I quickly closed the door and locked it, taking a deep sigh of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. The immediate threat was gone, but something told me this wasn't the last time I'd be dealing with these people. I wasn't going to let it end here, and I was determined to make sure they never pulled this stunt again. It was time to get serious. The moment I closed the door behind me, I felt a wave of relief. I had stood my ground against those two imposters, but the feeling of victory was short-lived. As much as I wanted to move on and forget about the encounter, something told me that this wasn't over. In fact, I had a nagging feeling in my gut that I needed to get to the bottom of this whole situation before it escalated any further. They had come to my door pretending to be HOA police, but I knew better. And if I didn't take action soon, they would find another way to come after me, or someone else in the neighborhood. I wasn't one to let things slide, especially when I knew that someone was pulling a scam. As a former sheriff, I had dealt with frauds and criminals in many different forms, and this was no different. These imposters might have been using the HOA as a cover, but their tactics were too sloppy to be part of any legitimate operation. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how dangerous this situation could become if I didn't expose them for what they were. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter and dialed the number of the current sheriff's office. It was time to get the authorities involved. I needed to make sure that everyone in my neighborhood was safe and that these two weren't planning to pull the same stunt on anyone else. After a few rings, the dispatcher picked up. "Deputy Martinez speaking. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end asked. "Hi, this is former Sheriff Michael Thompson." I began, trying to remain calm but firm. "I need to report a possible scam in my neighborhood. Two individuals came to my door pretending to be members of the HOA police. They were making threats of arrest over minor infractions, but I believe they're frauds. I want to file a report and make sure this is looked into." There was a brief pause before Deputy Martinez responded. "Former Sheriff Thompson, I understand your concern, and I'll make sure to alert our team about the situation. Can you provide any further details about these individuals? Were they carrying any paperwork, badges, or official identification?" I proceeded to explain everything I could remember about the two imposters, their appearance, their behavior, and the complete lack of legitimate documentation. I also mentioned how they had tried to intimidate me into complying with their arrest, even though none of their claims made any sense. By the time I finished describing the incident, I could tell that Deputy Martinez was taking me seriously. She promised to send an officer to my location to take an official report, and I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of purpose. While I waited for the authorities to arrive, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't about to let those two get away with this without facing some kind of consequence. I grabbed my laptop and began digging into the HOA's official records. I knew there had to be some sort of documentation that would clarify the rules and regulations of the community, as well as any legitimate enforcement mechanisms. Sure enough, within minutes, I found a copy of the HOA's charter online. The more I read, the more I realized just how much these frauds have been counting on the residents not paying attention. According to the official charter, the HOA had no authority to send police to make arrests or enforce fines. In fact, the only people with the legal power to enforce the community's rules were HOA board members and local law enforcement. There was no mention of any HOA police force, and certainly no provision that would allow for arrests over minor violations like garbage cans or mailbox alignment. Armed with this information, I started drafting a formal letter to the HOA board. I knew that it was crucial to inform them about the scam, and I needed to make sure that they took action to protect the community. In the letter, I explained the situation in detail, providing descriptions of the two individuals and the threats they had made. I included the information I had found in the HOA charter to back up my claim that no such police force existed. My goal was simple: to make sure that everyone in the neighborhood knew that these imposters had no legitimate authority and to prevent them from scamming anyone else. It wasn't long before the sheriff's deputy arrived at my door. Deputy Martinez was professional and efficient, taking down all the details of the incident and making sure to note everything I had reported. She asked if I had any physical evidence, documents, photographs, or video footage, but unfortunately, I hadn't thought to record the encounter. Still, I provided her with the information I had gathered about the HOA's rules and regulations, and she assured me that the department would look into it. "It's good that you acted quickly," she said. "We'll get to the bottom of this. It sounds like these guys are targeting other residents, and we don't want them getting away with it." With the report filed, I felt a sense of relief. But I knew this wasn't over yet. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that these frauds weren't just targeting me. They were targeting the entire neighborhood. They knew that most people would be too intimidated to challenge them, and that's why they had gone as far as to threaten arrest. The truth was, if I hadn't been so prepared to stand my ground, I could have easily fallen victim to their scam. And that's why I wasn't going to stop there. I called a few neighbors to let them know about what had happened. Mrs. Miller, who had witnessed the encounter earlier, was shocked when I told her the full story. "I knew something was off about those guys," she said, "but I never would have guessed they were trying to scam people." I assured her that the authorities were involved and that everyone would be notified about the fake HOA police. Over the next few hours, I reached out to other residents in the neighborhood, letting them know to be on the lookout for the imposters. By the time evening rolled around, I had spoken to nearly every neighbor, and many of them expressed their gratitude for the heads up. As the days went by, the sheriff's department began to investigate the two individuals I had encountered. It wasn't long before they were able to track down their identities, and sure enough, they had no ties to any HOA or law enforcement agency. They were nothing more than opportunistic frauds looking to make a quick buck off unsuspecting residents. The authorities were able to charge them with a number of offenses, including impersonating law enforcement officers and attempting to extort money from homeowners. The whole neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Thanks to quick thinking, persistence, and a little bit of good luck, we had managed to avoid falling prey to these con artists. But the experience served as a reminder. Sometimes you have to be vigilant and take action when things don't seem right. And I had learned that standing up for what's right, no matter the odds, is always worth it.